Hi everyone, this is Heather Lawton from the Flourish Academy. This is episode 547. Make sure that you subscribe on YouTube, both to these videos as well as the podcast. So we released a new episode last week called Flourish in 5, and that episode is available on podcast players as well as the behind the scenes video. All of the rest of the episodes are on regular podcast players, but definitely subscribe to those and check back often. We're now releasing 2 episodes per week. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some mindset issues today. So last week I had the pleasure of presenting for the Pet Photographers Club. They are based out of Australia. So yes, the FA is in fact international. And I gave a talk about feeling overwhelmed and trying obviously to reduce the overwhelm and get unstuck and help you move forward with your photography. And these are mostly photographers who are starting a business or aspire to maybe leave a corporate job, have a full-time photography business. Okay, I was chatting, coaching with my friend Laura on that call, and I asked her what was holding her back, and she said she was addicted to a steady paycheck. So she's working a full-time corporate gig in a job that she feels is stable and gives her a predictable paycheck. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I call those the golden handcuffs because they pay you money on a regular basis. You think, wow, this is really good. And she likes her job. So that's good, but it actually makes it a little bit more challenging in terms of thinking about leaving that job and replacing it with a full-time gig in pet photography specifically. So the first thing I said was, well, we need to look at your definition. Hi, Christina. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're here. We need to look at your definition of stability. So just because you have a corporate job does not necessarily mean that it's stable. I mean, people get let go from their corporate jobs all of the time, and things happen to corporations. I have a very close friend who I actually worked with previously in my corporate job. He's been with the company now for 25 years, and they let him go 2 weeks before Christmas without warning and without real reason except that they were restructuring. So your corporate gig that you think is stable is not necessarily stable. Maybe that makes you feel better to think of it that way, but it most likely isn't any more stable than you having your own business. So that's one thing. The second thing, she said she was addicted to a steady paycheck. And I said, well, couldn't you structure your business in such a way that all of your sales went into a checking account for your business and then you paid yourself on a regular basis, like every 2 weeks or whatever you're used to? And she was like, oh, yeah, I had never thought of that. Okay, so just because your sales are not steady or maybe even predictable does not mean you can't pay yourself in a steady and predictable way, does it? I mean, you're talking to a wedding photographer, and when I first started, I would get payments in, for like May, June, July weddings, and I'd have all of these weddings and all of these payments coming in from these weddings. So many, many thousands, 5, 10,000, lots of money coming in. And I would think, I am rich. I can buy a new camera. I can buy lenses, any gear that I want. I'll buy a new computer. And then January would hit. And in my area, I just don't shoot a lot of weddings in January due to the weather. So then I would be broke. Okay, that wasn't a sales issue. That was a Heather issue. That was a mismanagement of allocating those funds. So I implemented something last year called Profit First from Mike Michalowicz, which I highly recommend. I've talked about this a lot inside of the FA membership, and I have taught it extensively inside of our Elevate program. So I would definitely pick up this book. If you are concerned, like, oh, I'm not a numbers person, or the accounting stuff is so boring, this guy is actually really funny, had a lot of good things. I'm showing you all of the pages I have marked, had a lot of really good things to say, and this absolutely revolutionized my business. And I had my best year ever last year, 2020, as I know several of our elevators did as well. And I attribute that to the Profit First methodology. So definitely check that out. But I also asked Laura if her perceived need for a regular, steady paycheck was greater than her desire to build a business that gave her freedom, flexibility, and options. because what I believe she was experiencing is a core value conflict. Oh, I want a stable paycheck, steady job, but I also want to be free and do my own thing and photograph puppies in her case. And I mean, listen, I don't know which one is greater, but the thing is, we just disproved that this corporate job is stable because it could end at any time. And we came up with a way to allocate our funds so it's not feast or famine as it is traditionally for photographers, but a way to pay ourselves on a regular basis so we don't feel like, oh, there's a ton of money, there's no money, there's a ton of money, there's no money. And we just like regulate it. So that's possible. And because we can do all of those things in our business, I said to her, I fail to see the problem. You can have everything you want even in your own business. It's not necessarily one or the other. But she had been so stuck in this because she didn't even consider, that there was maybe a different way to do it. We make assumptions about things that we think and believe, and we assume that they are just 100% true. And then we make decisions and take action based on those assumptions. I want you to question the thinking. Don't believe everything you think. So we took it back to the beginning. She said, well, I want to have a regular paycheck. And I was like, oh, okay, here's the answer. You can do this. And she had never thought, well, I could just pay myself on a regular basis. Now, before I got into Profit First, I will say, early on in my business, I learned pretty quickly within the first few years that having all of this money in the summer and then no money in the winter was not a good idea. So, of course, I would set money aside and I would save it, of course. I'm not an idiot. But then I changed the way my wedding packages were structured. So at the time I was charging $5,200. There was a $1,000 non-refundable retainer to book your date. And then the $4,200 remaining was split into two payments, $2,100 6 months prior and $2,100 1 month prior. So what that meant was that in January, I was getting 6-month payments for June weddings. Well, June was always full for me. So if I had 4 weddings in June, I was getting 4 payments in January. I'm no math wizard, but that's over $8,000 that was coming in January that previously that was not happening. So that was the first thing I did so this is especially for wedding photographers, is I spread out the payments. I did that as much for myself as I did my client. Not many of them, there were a few, but not many of them wanted to pay the $5,200 up front. So I split it into 3 payments. That helped them and it helped me. And I did that for many, many years, and that worked out really well. And I just got wiser about how I spent my money. I mean, I became more aware of my expenses and what was really necessary. Do I really need that new camera or that new lens or that new computer? And listen, sometimes the answer to that is yes, I actually do need it. But oftentimes they were just things that I wanted. Okay, so then last year, I actually read this book towards the end of 2019 into the beginning of 2020. I was so excited to implement this. And I created different checking accounts so that I could allocate funds and distribute them. And this has changed my life. Mike says the same thing. He just commented. Yeah. So what did you say? Yeah. Oh, Christina said, you're not your thoughts, right? Always question your thoughts. Yes, Mike says Profit First has helped me immensely. Yeah, me too. If you're inside of Elevate, I have training on this. I've talked about it in the membership, but definitely pick up the book and read it. He's funny. Don't think, though, that you have to follow it to the letter of the law. So one thing I really appreciate about Mike is that he says you have to figure out a way that works for you. So I don't have as many accounts as he suggests in the book. The way mine work right now is I have all of my sales coming into my business checking account once per week. And this is different for everyone. You could do it a couple times a month. You could do it once a month. I just happen to do it every week. I run a profit loss report. There is a number in terms of total sales for the week. I look at that number. I immediately put 15% into a separate business savings account. That's for taxes. I put 5% immediately into a separate personal checking account. That's called profit. That's what he says, Profit First. Take out your profit prior to your expenses. I haven't mentioned expenses yet. That's the difference in the system. Most people are income or sales minus expenses equals profit. And that's not how he does it. And it's brilliant and it works. Trust me. So 15% immediately goes to taxes. And the reason somebody's going to ask, why 15%? Well, it's 15% before expenses. If it were after expenses, that percentage would be higher based on your tax bracket. It just happens to work out that it's 15% prior to expenses. Okay, that goes into a business savings account. 5% goes into a personal checking account because that's my profit. 50%, it's supposed to be 50% is allocated to owner's compensation, which again is a personal checking account. However, I sometimes have to look at my expenses and determine how much I can put into my owner's compensation. My goal is 50% into owner's compensation, and my goal is to keep my expenses at 35% or less, but that does not always happen. So I kind of have to balance those two things. But the point is that you pay yourself first. You pay yourself first, and if you're at the point where there's just never any money left over for you, then maybe we need to look at the expenses. Maybe there's an expense issue. But what's so great about this is it's like, okay, there's these target allocations that I want, and I'm not there yet. You know, my expenses were higher. In fact, a few years prior, I don't remember what year this was, there were times in my business where my expenses were sitting around 45, sometimes 50%, which is way too high. So I was trying to get that down to a level that made sense for all of these numbers. And for me, that would be 35% or less. I also tithe 10% to my church, so that comes out of there. Anyway, I have all of these percentages, I work it out, and all of this money gets distributed. The thought process here is that when you have smaller plates, you don't eat as much. Meaning, if you have a big one checking account for income and expenses, and there's all of this money sitting there, you think you're rich, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna go buy all of these things. But if you immediately allocate this one, especially the taxes, they go into a separate account, then these accounts are balanced, meaning the money is here, the money is here, on all of these different accounts, and then you don't have one account sitting there with, $10,000 or $20,000 in it thinking you can buy whatever you want. You know exactly where your tax money is, you know your profit, and you know your owner's compensation, and then the rest of the money is just in the business for either expenses or, reinvestment, obviously, into the business. Anyway, I took that a little further than I wanted to today, because if you've never heard this, I don't want it to feel overwhelming or intimidating. It might feel that way at first, but he really breaks it down. It's pretty straightforward, and it will change your life. And if this is one of the things that's holding you back, I know for some of you it is. Those of you that work a full-time corporate job have these reasons why you feel you can't go full-time with photography, even when you want to. And a lot of times, the two things I hear most often are stability and a steady paycheck. Well, the stability thing is out the window. Corporations aren't any more stable than I am, and I would rather depend on myself than them. And the steady paycheck, now we've disproven that because we can put money into account and then pay ourselves on a regular basis. So anyway, I hope that you found this useful. I'll see you in the next video.